Hello and welcome to AdQ&A Live, episode 21. I'm Nick Sinitra, and today we're talking about return on ad spend, or ROAS. So what got me interested in this topic? So this morning, as I was waking up, blearily looking through my feed in Facebook, I came across a post that somebody put in a Facebook media buying group that basically asserted that ROAS is not a good metric to use. In fact, is the wrong metric to use when it comes to campaign optimization. And this person went on to make some interesting points. Some of them I agree with to a certain extent, some of them I do not. But I thought it was a great conversation starter, if nothing else, so I wanted to jump into it and kind of talk through some of the points this person was making and sort of my take on them for what it's worth. Cool. So the main thing that there's a couple kind of key themes that this person was pointing out. First off, before we get too far down the rabbit hole, for those of you who are newer media buyers who are not familiar with this idea of return on ad spend, basically the calculation is pretty straightforward. It's revenue over spend, right? So if, for instance, we're talking about Facebook here, if Facebook is reporting that you have $10,000 in revenue and $5,000 in ad spend, then 10,000 over 5,000 is 2, so you would call that a 2x ROAS or 200% ROAS. Either way, it means the same thing. Basically, it's a 2-to-1 return. Now, one of this person's points, which I agree with, is that this doesn't tell you anything about profitability, right? That essentially revenue that's reflected in the platform is a revenue that's being passed back from somewhere. It's either being hard-coded as a particular amount for that product or category of product. It may or may not include discounts depending on whether you're using Shopify or Magento or what have you, right? And it doesn't bake in kind of margin and things like that, right? So he later makes the point that really something like ROI, or return on investment, which is basically profit over cost, is a better metric to use because it's going to give you a more accurate representation of how much you're actually banking off of your media spend. Now, that I agree with, but I think from a practical standpoint, that's a tough one because for most of us, I mean, from an efficiency, from a workflow standpoint, ROAS is kind of what we have to work with, right? We can use spreadsheets, we can use third-party utilities and so forth to, get ROI down to the ad level, but it's tricky, right? You're not able to sort of make optimizations in real time. So, and another point this person was making is that if you're an e-com advertiser and you have, 100 different products, right? It might be that one ad is driving a bunch of purchases of a particular product, which has a low margin, and very few purchases of a different product, which has a high margin. So you might look at the ROAS and draw the wrong conclusion about how you're performing as a business, right? That if you're generating a high volume of sales on an item with a low margin, you might look in Facebook and go, wow, I'm doing an amazing job, when in reality, you're actually driving relatively low profit, right? So again, that I agree with. But my counterpoint to that would be that the issue really isn't so much with ROAS as a metric. The issue is with the goal that's set in the first place, right? So what do I mean by this? If I, as an advertiser, right, I shouldn't be setting my ROAS target arbitrarily based on just a finger in the air, right? It shouldn't be 300% or 400% without any thought put into, okay, let's work backwards from that. If my ROAS needs to be 350% because I know that a certain amount of that revenue is going to be offset by my cost of goods sold, by my overhead in terms of payroll and all that kind of stuff, right? So in an ideal world, you would set your ROAS goal correctly in the first place so that you can optimize to ROAS and not those other things. The other point I'll make here is that that's also predicated on this idea that you're sort of setting a more consistent margin, right, on the back end, right? If you're pricing your things in a way to basically have a consistent margin across all products, right, that factors in the cost of goods sold and all that, then really it's all relative because at that point, whether you're talking about comparing revenue to and ROAS or profit and ROI, it's all relative, right? They're off by a certain kind of multiplier, but that multiplier is consistent from one product to the next, right? So as long as you understand that, when you're setting your ROAS goal in the first place, it's not necessarily a problem. You can still optimize to ROAS right there in the Facebook platform. Now, another point that was made is that Facebook takes too much credit, right? That their standard attribution window is a 1-day view, 28-day click. And yeah, so I think for a lot of advertisers, and the point that was made is a valid one, is that you may be running on 3, 4, 5 different media channels. You might have some PR, some marketing, some press out there. that's generating some kind of organic brand awareness and purchase intent, and that Facebook is basically sitting in there and kind of getting the alley-oop off of all this stuff. And that's true, right? But what can you do about it? So there's a couple things. For one, you don't have to use the standard attribution window in Facebook. You can change it. If I want to remove the view through attribution, right? Like if I want Facebook to agree with what I'm seeing in Google Analytics, first of all, Google Analytics doesn't do view through attribution, right? Because a UTM parameter can't be passed unless you click on the ad in the first place. Google doesn't know what the UTM parameter is, what the traffic source is, if all somebody does is look at the ad, right? So if you want, you can go into Facebook and you can literally just customize your column in Ads Manager, and you can remove view through attribution. Cool, so now you've got a different view, and that will actually change your ROAS as well. So I remove the view through attribution, now Facebook is taking credit for fewer conversions, and my ROAS goes down proportionately. The other thing that you can do is if you want to tell Facebook to not, like essentially, the other point this person was making is that, let's say from a retargeting perspective, once somebody's been exposed a certain number of times to your brand and your messaging and any promos you might be running, that they're very likely to convert regardless of whether or not you show them a retargeting ad. And they were saying that if you go look at view through conversions versus click attributed conversions for retargeting, you're going to see a high proportion of view through. Now that I don't necessarily agree with as far as the view through piece, but I would agree, sure, okay, maybe when your customer journey is down at the bottom of the funnel, yeah, maybe retargeting is getting too much credit. But so what you can do is if you don't want Facebook to optimize to people that are probably going to convert anyway, what you can do is you can set your actual optimization window. So this is different from the attribution window from a reporting perspective, but if you actually go in, I believe it's at the ad set level, and you specify under, what is the conversion that you want to optimize for using OCPM and so forth, you can actually set that window. By default, I believe it's a 1-day view, 7-day click, right? Which is to say, you're telling Facebook, hey, I want you to try to get people who are going to convert within 1 day of viewing or 7 days of clicking my ad. And I believe we talked about this in a previous episode, but you can change that. You can change it to a 1-day click only, right, with no view, or a 7-day click only with no view, and so forth. And there are implications for doing that, right? You are basically reducing your effective reach anytime you're putting handcuffs on Facebook and saying, hey, don't show to this person unless they're going to convert within 1 day of clicking, right? So that reduces your potential reach, that maybe increases your CPM, and then your CPA goes up and your ROAS goes down, right? So none of the things that this person was talking about are just easy one snap of your fingers, quick fix solutions. There are ways to approach this even within the platform, but they can have their own consequences. So it's not maybe as simple as it seems. So cool. So we talked about the fact that it maybe doesn't have a bearing on real business objectives. Again, I would argue that as long as you are aware of all of your your EBITDA and your COGS and all of that stuff, and you're setting your ROAS the right way in the first place, then yeah, you can use ROAS. It's fine. You just have to understand that you need to have a higher ROAS goal if you have lower margins to account for all that stuff, right? And then as far as the too much credit to Facebook, again, this person was discounting the fact that you could basically, in Facebook itself, reduce the amount of credit that Facebook takes just through the reporting window, right? The attribution window, or or basically change the optimization window to try to force Facebook to get people to convert faster, so that there's a higher chance that that ad is the thing that actually got them over the top, and it's not just freeloading off of the work that you've done on your other media channels. The other thing I got to touch on is that this person was suggesting that in Google Analytics you want to be looking at last click primarily, right? I have a big problem with that, so I have to respectfully disagree there. So in a marketing ecosystem, when you have a whole bunch of different channels running, right, what you will see, and I'll maybe a little bit hyperbolic, but 9 times out of 10, if you have, let's say, 5 different media channels running, and you go look in your GA and you look at last touch, most times what you're going to see is that direct and organic and paid search are going to get most of the last touch, right? Because they're basically sitting at the bottom of this gravity well where you're building all of this brand awareness with your paid media through your prospecting on Facebook, through your generic terms, on search, through your display display campaigns you might be running. You're getting all your brand awareness and your messaging out there. And then what's happening is that eventually somebody's going to get to the point where they're like, oh, what is that called? Let's say, like, I don't know why Mudwater came to top of mind. We don't work with them, but mudwater.com. Cool. I'm going to go there. Boom. So they click, they type that in, they convert. That was direct, right? And that's where a lot of the last touch conversions come from. And it gives actually too little credit to the channel or channels that got that ingrained in their skull in the first place, right? So what can you do about it? Well, there's a couple things. So one is that in Google Analytics, and I can screen share this another time, you can go to conversions, and under that conversions, there's a model comparison tool where you can basically break out your different sources or your channel groupings and so forth, and you can see how much credit does each one of those channels or sources or what have you get on a first touch basis or a last touch basis or one of Google's other attribution models, like time. It's called time delay. There's position based where it's like 40%, 40%, and then 20% in between, right, for first and last touch. And you can look and see how those things compare, and you'll probably see what I described, that direct and organic and search are going to get potentially more credit on a last touch basis than what they get on a first touch basis. So should you look entirely last click? No, I would not say so, right? I think that other ways you can look at this, if you want to understand where the synergies are, where somebody's coming in from one channel and converting on another channel, it's more of a pain in the ass, but what you have to do is you have to basically build segments, right? Segments in Google Analytics that show, say, hey, show me all the users for whom Google search, right? Or whether it's brand terms or generic terms, show me all the users for whom Google was the first touch, right? And then go look at the source medium and see, okay, Google was the first touch, but then where are they converting? And do that exercise. Make yourself a matrix where you have first touch along the top, last touch along the bottom, and see where are your like power combinations where you have a disproportionately high number of people that are coming in via one channel and then converting via another, right? That channel is basically setting you up for an alley-oop, which then this other channel is basically nothing but net, right? But then there's other channels you're going to see where the first touch and last touch are sort of self-contained, right? For those channels, there's still a benefit potentially to doing them depending on what your platform ROI is or ROAS. But you have to understand though in that case that there's not much of a halo effect, right? Where that channel is all of a sudden influencing other people. Though again, remember that one of the big downfalls in GA or shortcomings or limitations is that it doesn't account for view-through attribution, right? That's a tough one, and unfortunately there's not really anything to be done about that. That's where you kind of have to take a look at what the platform says and then kind of read the tea leaves a little bit and see if you agree or disagree. So ROI is key. Yeah, I mean, I agree with this in principle, but the problem is that in practice, you're talking about basically making the workflow way more complicated by having to marry reports from potentially 3 different sources. I want to get the GA data, I want to get my Shopify data, I want to get my platform data, and I want to pour through all of this and understand like, hey, this ad, it drove this number of purchases. First of all, okay, that's platform stuff. Let me put this over here. What does GA say about this ad? Well, did I set up my UTM parameters to pass ad ID in the first place? Oh, I didn't. Now I got to go do all that, right? Well, let's say you did. Cool. Okay, what does GA say? I got this number of purchases. Well, what did they buy? Okay, if I got enhanced e-commerce set up in GA, I can actually look at that. If I don't, I got to set it up. Let's push that aside. Let's look at Shopify. Shopify has a whole different set of data, right? And their channel attribution is totally borked because it might show that the last touch might be in its own site, right? So that's a whole can of worms too. So it's not as easy. Like it's really easy to say like, the best analogy I can come up with is if I say like, well, if humans could breathe water, then nobody would drown. Well, yeah, but humans can't breathe water. So you got to use a snorkel or some scuba gear and stuff, and it's a big pain in the ass. Again, I agree in principle, yeah, that'd be great. But in practice, what is the most efficient and most effective way to optimize, quickly, right? That's a big part of it too, is like all the stuff we talked about, maybe it's possible and maybe it's not, depending on how your stuff is set up. But how much time are you basically investing in doing this, and what's the opportunity cost, right? If you could be making faster moves optimizing off of ROAS when you've set your ROAS goals appropriately in the first place based on your business realities, that's the move, right? It's all about speed in this game. Cool. All right, this is a quick one. Sorry for a bit of a rant. I think this person's not completely wrong. I just think that in practice, it's a more nuanced and complicated situation than this person was sort of portraying it as. And yeah, hopefully that gave you some food for thought. I know I tend to talk a lot about theory, um, and so I'm a bit of a hypocrite for kind of blasting this person a little bit for talking about like the theory of things rather than the practical standpoint. But hopefully I've kind of brought in some practical considerations to kind of paint the picture. Anyway, cool. We're gonna call it there. If you are watching the video and you're enjoying it, please give a thumbs up, like, subscribe, whatever. If you don't like it, thumbs down, don't subscribe, whatever. If you have questions, feel free to hit us up in the comments. And if you have other topics you'd like us to cover, any burning questions, stuff that you're seeing out in the wild, things that you want to know about, hit us up. Also, be sure to tune in next week. We got some stuff planned. Hopefully this goes down, but we have one of my colleagues is talking about the hype cycle. That's going to be cool. And then a couple of my colleagues are going to be talking about topics related to Google search next week as well. A couple of our subject matter experts here, so that's going to be cool. All right, that's all I got. Thank you for watching, and tune in next time.